In this video, we're going to talk about Zsphere Retopology. Zsphere Retopology is just one of many ways of retopologizing a mesh inside of ZBrush. That's taking something like this alien here, which is actually a former Dynamesh. You see that there's no organized topology to this. It's just a group of shrink-wrapped quad faces. Retopology allows us to take a disordered mesh and turn it into an ordered mesh. It also allows us to build new geometry from scratch. For example, in this demonstration, we're going to create wing membranes to fit between the bones of these wings. Now in ZBrush, we know that we can retopologize using ZRemesher. That will take something like this alien bust and then create an organized mesh from it. We can go to B for brush, Z for ZRemesher, and use the ZRemesher guides to help guide that algorithm to give us the best possible mesh. So that is for creating a new topology based on an existing model. We also have B for brush, T for topology, the topology brush. Now we talk about the topology brush in another video. The topology brush allows us to draw curves on the surface and then generate polygon faces from those curves. And this is really, really useful for creating things like organized models or for creating new topology based on an existing model, maybe for wing membranes or costumes. The problem with this approach is, that is the topology brush, is it can be a little bit tricky to extend off from an existing mesh into space. So for example, if I start to draw curves like this that extend off negative space, and then we'll complete this and make a quad from it, you see we get a quad face, and if I alt click and drag off the curves on the model, it will clear any hanging edges. As I start to move out here, and I'm traversing negative spaces where there is no model, this is where it can start to become a little bit challenging. So you see we've lost this face over here. We'll clear that out and then redraw that. You see what's happening is these curves are sort of snapping off into the void, as it were. So it's very hard for us to just create an edge that extends across that negative space. That's where something like Zsphere Retopology comes in really handy. I use it often to make things like wing membranes or costume elements or drapery that sort of extends off of a body. So let's take a look at how to do this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my polygroups, and we'll go into frame mode. And you can see that because this was created using Dynamesh and insert meshes, it automatically picked up some polygrouping. So I am going to just clear out, or just hide, the head, and I'm going to make a duplicate of the wings. I use that as what I call a proxy mesh. So with the head hidden, I'm going to go to Subtool, Duplicate, and then I'm going to go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. Now I've deleted the hidden head off of those wings, and if I go back to my original here, I can Control-Shift-click on the background, and that shows everything again. Now I'll go to those wings, and I will turn off visibility on everything else. This is a little extra subtool here that I don't need. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Go to our proxy wings, and we'll turn off visibility on the eyes. So here we have just our proxy wings. I turned off visibility on everything else because we don't want to use solo mode, because that will keep us from actually seeing our Zsphere topology once we use it. So here I just have a proxy mesh of those wings, and if I want to clean up the polygroups, I can just go to the polygroup menu and just click Group Visible, and that just gives me a single polygroup for those. It's not necessary, but sometimes it makes it easier when I'm looking at it if I don't need those polygroups on that particular proxy mesh. So the proxy mesh I'm only going to use as a basis to draw my Zsphere topology on top of. So to create a Zsphere-based topology, go to your tool palette and select a Zsphere. That will put a Z-sphere on screen, and we have an entire video just on working with Z-spheres. We use Z-spheres to generate meshes. We can use it as a modeling tool, and here we're using it as a basis for our topology. We can also use it as a rigging tool, as you can see in the transpose tutorial, where we talk about transpose rigging using Z-spheres and Transpose Master. So as I said, in this case, we're going to be using it for a topology. So with that Z-sphere as our current Z tool, go to the bottom of your tool list, and there is a menu called Rigging. If I click select mesh, I can select anything that I happen to have here in my tool palette. I'm going to grab the wings. You see this has 5 subtools. That's my mesh where I have those proxy wings. And the proxy wings are the currently selected subtool in that stack. So if I click that, it will add those wings in this sort of X-ray form here. Now I'm going to go to topology. Make sure that X symmetry is turned on, and I will turn on edit topology. Now the Z-sphere appears to disappear, but it's that little dot right there. And what we will do is we will start to draw a Z-sphere chain. So I will just click twice here. That draws one bit of a chain. I'll draw here, 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 and then here, connecting back. So I've created an equal number of verts on either side. Each Z-sphere dot represents a vertex. So there's 3 here, and there's 3 here. So I'll just double click off the model. And then if I want to preview the mesh that I'm going to be creating, I will use the A hotkey. The A hotkey allows us to preview the topology that we're going to create by showing us the adaptive skin that will result from that. So make sure your draw size is turned all the way down to 1. Make sure edit topology is turned on. And then if you press the A key, if it can generate a mesh from this, it will show you. But right now we're not getting a mesh. So remember we put an extra vert in here. Usually ZBrush can intuit or figure out where the quads will be. But in this case, it's having a problem. So I will just draw a new edge, which is a Z-sphere line here. Double click off the model, press the A key, and now we get our preview. Now you see it looks like it has holes in it. That's because adaptive skin defaults to Dynamesh resolution. So turn Dynamesh resolution down under the adaptive skin submenu. Press the A key again, and then press it one more time, and then that gives us a polygon view. As you can see here, these are the polys that will be generated. So we'll press A again, and that brings us back to our Z-sphere remesh view. So if I go to move or press the W key, I can zoom in here and I can start to scoot around these points. So we can clean this up a little bit, extend these points out, and you see we have an extra point there. Now if I want to get rid of that, I can just go ahead and alt click while I am in draw mode. So I'm in move mode right now, go back to draw, alt click, and that deletes that point. Then I can go back to this endpoint here and connect to this endpoint here. Double click and press the A key, and now we get a cleaner mesh. So press the A key again to exit out of your preview mode. Make sure you're in draw mode, and I will just carry on drawing one quad at a time. I think the best way to approach this, or any topology, double click off the model, is to make it very, very simple and go one face at a time. Now it might seem time consuming, but it actually goes pretty quickly, all things considered, and it will save you time and trouble if you check each point as you go. Now remember, this is just a method of creating sort of a base from which to work. We can continue to sculpt these wing membranes, we can continue to work them to match the bones underneath, and ultimately we can then retopologize them again using Z-Remesher, or we can remesh them with Unify to merge them into the existing model. So back to Q for draw. Let's go ahead and draw another face here. Double click off the model, and I always press the A key to check my work as I go, because there's nothing more frustrating than spending a long time working on a topology that you haven't checked, and then when you check it, you see it's gone horribly wrong. So there we go. Now, you can see it's very easy, compared to what we saw earlier with the topology brush, to take these points and move them out across space. If I wanted to add a new edge through here, I could just go to Q for draw, and then click along each one of these, double click and press the A key, and I get a new edge cut there. I'll do it again here. I will click here, and click here. Now, Z-sphere remeshing can handle tries, but I recommend doing the best you can to make everything quads, and that's not hard to do if you keep everything simple. Now, let's say that I wanted to extend these off. Maybe I wanted these to come down and hang a little bit. I would just go to W for move, and I can pull these points down in space. And unlike the topology brush, these are not trying to snap to the mesh underneath or the background. So if I pull these down like this and press the A key, You see it extends them off. So this is how I might use this to create a robe or a dress or some other bit of topology or costume topology that I wanted to extend off of the body. So I will go ahead and undo those. So now we have our membranes. Now what do we do with them? Well, all we need to do is go to our adaptive skin menu. And we also talk about this in the Z-Sphere modeling chapter. We have to make adaptive skin. That takes our Z-Sphere mesh and turns it into a new model that will appear in the tool palette up here. So if I click Make Adaptive Skin, it will apply all these settings and then make a new model called Skin. So 2 is the number of subdivision levels that we will get. Dynamesh resolution, I keep at 0. Always keep that at 0 for using Zsphere Retopology, because Dynamesh doesn't do you any favors when you're trying to make a retopology. Here we've got the global radial density, which twist. This is mainly used for creating bodies out of Zsphere, so this doesn't so much apply to what we're trying to do here, where we're making 2 flat polygon planes. So I will click Make Adaptive Skin. Now you see we have skin, Z-spheres. If I select that, you see that we have our wing membranes. Now, I want to give these thickness. If I go down to Tool, Display Properties, you see double-sided is turned on. If I turn that off, you see these don't actually have any thickness. They disappear when I rotate around the back face. Turn double-sided back on. Now, how can we give these wing membranes thickness? It's quite a bit easier now than it actually used to be, but there's multiple ways of approaching that. First off, though, I am going to append these into our existing alien. So I'm going to go to the alien that has the subtools, go to the subtool menu, go to append. Now, the difference between append and insert, often this comes up in my classes. Append will put this new skin Z-sphere at the bottom of the list. Insert will put it between this selected subtool and the other. So if I do insert and insert skin Z-sphere, you see it inserts there in between those 2 subtools. That just controls the order in which that applies into the subtool stack. So there we have our polygon mesh for our wings. We have our proxy mesh here. So we don't get confused, I'm going to rename this proxy wings, because I'm going to save this Z tool so it's available to you to follow along. And we'll just drag this down to the bottom of the list. And then we've got here our creature bust. We'll turn off frame mode. So we have the creature bust, and then we have the skin for the wings, and we'll turn off visibility on the proxy because we really don't need that anymore. But we do need thickness on these wings. Now, the first thing that I might elect to do is select the wings, take my move brush, that's my hotkey number 1. I'll turn my draw size up now, and I want to sort of match these up a little bit to the bones. So I'm just going to drag these out a little bit, position them like so. Make sure that these are sitting inside the bone that supports them, just by moving my view around, and I can hold down the Alt key while I use the move brush, and that will push those faces in or pull them depending on the direction that I push. I used this on the film The Kid Who Would Be King when I was designing one of the looks for Morgana. She had wings, and I was doing the ZBrush concept, and I used Z-spheres to create the wing membranes for her. Then we, of course, further refined them in the topology when the animation mesh was made for the actual pipeline. These were retopologized and worked into the existing model, so the wing membranes were actually part of the body. But in the concept phase, when we were trying to sort of work out ideas, work out shapes, it was very helpful to have them as separate objects. There we go. So now you can see we've matched those up a little bit better. So I want to give thickness to these. So one of the easiest ways to do that is to go to Geometry. Now we have 2 subdivision levels on these wing membranes. I'm going to delete the lower because we're going to actually use dynamic subdivision levels with thickness to create our wing membranes. And we can't do that if we have subdivisions. So I'll go to Dynamic Subdivisions, turn on Dynamic. I'll angle here so you can see a bit better, and I will turn up thickness. And this will actually give us a thickness to this mesh. Now this is a dynamic subdivision. This doesn't actually exist as geometry just yet. When I want to apply it as geometry, I will click the Apply button, and then that bakes that down into actual geometry with polygrouping. So that is one method of giving that thickness. I'm going to undo that, and I'll show you another. The other method uses the Z Modeler brush. So if I go to B for brush, Z for Z Modeler, and select the Z Modeler brush, it's going to tell me that it performs best with dynamic draw size. I click OK. And again, we have an entire chapter just on Z Modeler, but this is a great use of it here. If I mouse over a face, it lights the face up and it tells me I can do operations on a face. If I mouse over an edge, it gives me edge operations. Points give me point operations. So if I mouse over an edge and press the space bar, I've got all these edge actions I can perform. For example, extrude. So I could extrude an edge loop, for example, by clicking and dragging. That's a new tool inside of ZBrush 2021, which we'll talk about elsewhere. What we want is to mouse over a face. QMesh is sort of the default Z Modeler face operation. It's just an all-encompassing kind of extrude and merge all built into one. It's a very powerful tool. So we're going to QMesh. Now we need our target. We don't want to do a single polygon. We want to do polygroup all. That will grab all these polygroups, everything that you see here that's green, which is the entirety of the mesh, and it will perform this operation on that. So we're going to quite simply just click and drag, and that will extrude this out, as you see here. Now I could extrude it this way or this way, but you need to be careful to recognize that you're still potentially going to have normal flipping issues. So if you've got double-sided turned on, turn it off. And you can see when I extrude that way, it actually has flipped normals. I can't see my faces. So we'll undo that. And then if I extrude it this way, turn off double-sided, now you can see it actually, I see the model. So be very aware that your normals can be flipped, and you won't know it if you have double-sided turned on in ZBrush. So now I can add subdivision levels just by Control-D, turn off frame mode, and I can carry on sculpting on these wing membranes. It's just a normal mesh like any other. I can take my damn standard brush and sort of push this in a little bit more to facilitate seeing those bones there. I can add another subdivision level, and we can add some detail to this. Maybe I'll take the move brush and I'll go to the brush menu, curve, and turn on accurate curve mode. I really like using this with the move brush because it lets my brush take on a very pointed kind of effect. This helps me create very wicked kind of sharp points on these wings. Go around to the back here and just make sure that these wing membranes actually attach to the back of the creature. So we'll just bring them back along here. Now, if I want to sculpt on something like a wing membrane, if I take the standard brush and I start sculpting maybe veins on here, if we roll around to the front, you see that brush stroke bleeds through. Now, this is very important anytime you're doing things like membranes or costumes. You want to go to your brush menu, go to auto masking, and turn on backface mask. And what that does is it backface masks. So anything I sculpt on one side, the back faces will be protected from it. So your brushes will sometimes bleed through if you have a draw size that just is a larger scale than the thickness of the actual object you're working on. So now I can see we're at 65 million. Let's add another subdivision level. I can go to the standard brush, maybe select alpha 60, hold down the Alt key. We can create some wrinkle patterns here through these wings, just radiate this out. And then I'll take the smooth brush and smooth that back a little bit and just build up some of that texture. It just gives us more of an interesting look to these wings. Let's bring that right down to the bottom edge there. And just hit that with a little bit of smooth again, just to soften those up. We go to the back view now, you'll see none of that came across under the back view. So perhaps I want to put a different texture on the back. I might go to my alphas and select alpha 57. And I'll just invert that, hold down the Alt key, and that's too big and too strong. So I'll turn my draw size down and maybe turn my Z intensity down just a little bit. And I'll make these circular patterns. This gives me a nice sort of leathery skin texture on the back of the wing. Take my move brush, and then I'll just gently press to make sure that the membranes are sitting inside the bone structure that's supposed to support them. And I can step down my subdivisions here and do a little bit of smoothing along the edge if I want to thin that. Do be aware, though, the thinner you make these, if you do elect to dynamesh them into the existing model, thinner meshes run the risk of becoming getting holes in them. So sometimes on something like this, I might elect to make it a little bit thicker while I'm dynameshing it. And then once I Z-remesh or retopologize the membrane or the costume, then I'll make it thinner so it's a more realistic thickness, just to make the process of sculpting on it and working on it a bit easier. You could also, on wing membranes like this, utilize the ZBrush cloth tools. So those are new in ZBrush 2021. And we talk about those in their own chapter, but it doesn't take much imagination to see how you could take these wing membranes and simply drape them across the bone structure as a collision object. If you have not watched the video yet on cloth, then that will make a lot more sense once you have. It's a little beyond the scope of this particular video to dive into that again, though. So there we go. Now I'll go back to subtools and let's turn on the teeth, gums, and the eyes just so we can have something to look at. And there we go. So this is how we would retopologize using Z-spheres. It's, as I said, really powerful and really helpful, especially when you're doing costume elements or membranous elements. It's something that I don't think that there's another tool in ZBrush that's quite as easy to create these sorts of shapes. There's other methods of doing it. Of course, you could do it with taking a sphere and scooching a sphere out into the shape of that membrane and flattening it down. But none of them I have found have been as effective or as easy to match something up to the bone structure as the Zsphere Retopology. And it's also just good to know how to use that because, as I said, it's been around in ZBrush for many, many years, but it's not often discussed or used because I think a lot of people don't even know that it's there. One more thing. Here's a little bonus. I'd like to talk about getting these wings merged into this body. Now, let's say I want to retopologize this head, and I want the wings to be part of that retopology. Now, you might think to yourself, oh, well, I need to dynamesh the wings in as part of the head. Well, if you're going to be retopologizing this mesh, you need to have both parts as a single object. So, for example, if I Z-remesh the bust and I Z-remesh the wings separately, those are still going to be two separate models. If I try and dynamesh them together, I run the risk of creating holes and running into problems in the wing membranes. If I don't plan to carry on Z-remeshing, or excuse me, if I don't plan to carry on dynameshing, there's really no reason to dynamesh them together, but we need to have them as a single object, so Z-remesher will treat them as a single object. So I'll show you two ways that we can go about doing that. They're both going to require that we merge these two pieces down. So I'm going to save our work first off so we can have this to come back to. And I am saving this in the download files that will be available for you. So you can download this with the unmerged wings and with the proxy wings available here so you can easily follow along with these videos. So I'm going to go to the head and I'll go to merge, merge down, click OK. Now that merges the wing membranes into the creature bust, but these are still separate. They are not dynameshed together. They're not topologically merged. They are still two separate objects. If I go to polygrouping, this is an easy way to see that. Go to polygroups, auto group. That automatically groups every separate object. So you see we have two separate wings and a separate body. If these were joined together topologically, as if they had been dynameshed together, this would just read as one polygroup. So two different ways that we can actually merge these together. The first, of course, being dynamesh. And this brings up its own set of potential issues. So if we go to geometry, open up dynamesh. Now I can execute dynamesh and glue these together. Now, early on in the videos for this lecture series, I talked about ZBrush scale. ZBrush scale affects a whole bunch of things inside of ZBrush, including dynamesh. So I just want to check my size, and you see that this is quite large. It's 5 brush units. So I don't need to preserve any external scale for this object. So what I will do is I will go to my Z plugin menu. I will go to Scale Master, and I'm just going to click ZBrush Scale Unify. And that unifies all of my subtools to an ideal ZBrush scale of 2 brush units. And that's going to make Dynamesh a bit more reliable and predictable with its values. So with a resolution of 408, I click Dynamesh, and you see that I lose details. So I'm going to undo that, and we'll double this. Actually, let's just set this to 1024. Dynamesh. And there we don't really lose as much detail. We could set that higher and retain more and more detail. But if you go into frame mode, you see that that has Dynameshed those into the model. Now, as I said, the problem you potentially run into this is if you have a very, very thin area. I'm just going to take the move brush, and I'm going to start moving this membrane back a bit like this. This is another thing to be aware of too. I have double-sided turned off, but I also, under my brush menu, I have back face masking turned on. So that means if I grab faces like this and move them around, I might not be aware if I were to have accidentally, let's turn off my back face masking. If back face masking is turned off, it's easier to make this actually happen. So let me grab these faces here. There we go. So I might not be aware in this case if I end up with a mesh interpenetrating itself. So let me see if I can't make this happen. It's got a very specific look to it when this happens that I want you to be able to recognize. So make sure that I've got... There we go. So you might find yourself seeing something like this. This is really overstated, but that is where one part of the membrane is interpenetrating the other, and that could be quite small. That could be quite easy to miss. It might be something like that. So just be aware that if you were to Dynamesh this, you're going to end up with sort of a weird little spike. Sometimes you might end up with a hole. So let me undo these and get back to the original shape. So just be aware before you Dynamesh something thin like a wing membrane like this that you don't have anything that's interpenetrating the opposite side of the membrane. As you're working, let's say I take the clay tubes brush and you're starting to sort of create negative spaces here. If I Dynamesh this again, there we go. You may find you end up with holes. So that's another potential issue with Dynamesh and merging the wing membranes down. So just be aware that those are the things, those are the gotchas that'll pop up. Flipped normals and interpenetration and holes in those wing membranes. And they might pop up later on as you're further sculpting and Dynameshing. Another way of solving this problem is to use Dynamesh but use groups. So if I go to frame mode and I turn on groups and then Dynamesh, make sure I turn this back to 1024. What this will do is it will Dynamesh these together, but it keeps those polygroups as actual separate objects. If I Control-Shift-Click on them, you see that they're still separate. It's Dynameshing all three groups separately. So it's keeping them separated. So I could carry on sculpting and Dynameshing and working on this. Perhaps I wanted to carve out some holes in the wings. In that case, I could go to B for brush, I for insert, and grab one of my IMM primitive brushes, in this case maybe a cylinder, and then click and drag. And then I'll take the transpose gizmo and just move that through so it's interpenetrating. Control-Shift-Click on it so it's the only thing visible, and I will go to Polygroups, and I will click Group as Dynamesh Sub. Then when I execute Dynamesh by Control-Clicking and dragging twice, it will carve a hole out, so I can start to cut holes in those wings. But it's not going to force me to Dynamesh the entire character together. It allows me to keep those wing membranes separate as I work, and also use Dynamesh on them, so that's quite valuable. Now, again, if I were to use ZRemesher on these, it's going to see these as three separate objects, and that's not going to help us if we want to group these or merge these together into a single topological whole. So let's turn off Dynamesh, and I'll show you what I do in this situation. In this situation, I will go to W to bring up the Move gizmo. Let's go to the Unmasked Mesh Center, unlock it, and reset it just so it's cleaner looking. Hit the gizmo, and then I will select Remesh by Union. Now what this will do is it will take any areas where two meshes are interpenetrating, and it will remesh them. So I'm going to click Accept, go to Frame Mode. Now you see it's maintained all that topology, but if we zoom in, you can see it's actually merged the wing membranes with the bones topologically, and that's a lot easier to deal with when you want to remesh a surface, because it's going to see those wing membranes and the bones as a single object. So that concludes our look at Zsphere Retopology for membranes and costume elements, with a little bonus bit on using Dynamesh and different methods of joining these together. I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next chapter. Thanks for watching.